On this third and final day of the conference, we have two very special awards to lead off. And if I could have the slide, please. The first of those awards is the Consortium of Universities for Global Health Distinguished Leadership Award in Global Health. And this award honors a person who has made truly exceptional contributions to our field and who exemplifies the consortium's mission, which consists of 5 things. We focus on building interdisciplinary collaborations and facilitating sharing of knowledge to address global health challenges. We focus on helping members share their expertise across education, research, and service, and I think there's been a lot of that going on for the last 2 days. We focus on being dedicated to creating equity and reducing health disparities everywhere, on promoting mutually beneficial long-term partnerships between universities in resource-rich and resource-poor countries, developing human capital, and strengthening the capacity of institutions to address the challenges I just mentioned. And finally, and maybe most importantly, to translating knowledge into action, because otherwise it doesn't mean very much. And it's hard to imagine an individual who better fits that description than Dr. Harvey Fineberg, who is this year's awardee. Now, I've had the privilege of knowing and learning from Harvey over much of the arc of his career, both at Harvard and at the Institute of Medicine. And the combination of his focusing on strong science and then really emphasizing the translation of that science and of his insights into effective policy and programs has been something from which I've continued to learn a lot. It's guided much of what I've done in my career, and I think it's helped many of us working in global health. So I am really thrilled today that CUGH is presenting this award to you, Harvey. For the full introduction of Dr. Fineberg, I am going to ask Tim Brewer to come on up here. But Harvey, I'm thrilled that you're here with us today. So.
So I'm not sure what there's left to do. Dean of the Harvard School of Public Health, Provost of Harvard University, President of the Institute of Medicine. Just from that list, it's probably readily apparent that Harvey is an incredibly accomplished individual who has made major contributions to society in health, public health, and education. But what you might not get from those positions and all the numerous very well-deserved honors he's received is his passion for social justice and equity, and that he just happens to be one of the nicest individuals you could ever have the pleasure of meeting. Please join me in congratulating Harvey Fineberg as this year's CUGH Distinguished Leader winner. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you so much, Keith and Judy and Tim. It's always a pleasure when you have an opportunity to be welcomed and introduced by dear friends who are willing both to exaggerate on what they say and to omit quite a few things that I know they know and are willing not to bring up at this particular occasion. I am very, very honored to be here with you this morning. I was reminded of the occasion when I was given the assignment of introducing another award winner, and I called him and I said, Vince, they're very strict in this program, and really you've done so much, and they've told me that I have exactly 3 minutes. I don't know what I'm going to do. And he said, yeah, I see the problem. What in the world are you going to say those last 2 minutes? And I feel it's a little bit like that, that we have an opportunity to be rather concise and to move on to what is really, for us, the reason why you are all here and why what you do matters a great deal, which is global health and the place of universities in promoting and advancing global health. So when I was given the opportunity to be with you this morning and to receive this wonderful award and invited to offer a few reflections on the state of global health and the directions and what roles universities in fact play, I was really thrilled to have this opportunity, and I'm very, very grateful to be here with you. Now, I do have a button advancer, and I want to begin with something that we tend, especially today, sometimes to overlook in our zeal to think about globalization, which we'll come to, but I want to begin by emphasizing the reality that health is really about each individual's health and well-being. And the circumstances of health and the determinants of health for individuals really comes back to the conditions and circumstances in their locality. And this, of course, was emphasized in the old names that we had for our field in tropical medicine, for example. But sometimes we tend to overlook this individuality in the distribution of both disease and all of the determinants of disease and the characteristics of the populations that we are focusing on. And whether we're thinking about the age distribution or the education levels or the income levels or the nature of the cultural values or the environmental factors and the vectors and all of those elements that contribute to health and well-being, it's important for us, I think, to remember that these really are very, very highly localized and highly variable around the world. Just to take a few illustrative examples, this illustrates the range in income levels around the world on a per capita basis. You might think that the 99,558 at the left end of this scale is a typo, but it's not. That's the per capita income of Qatar. And then in sub-Saharan Africa, many countries with per capita income of well under $1,000 and even less today. But the variability in capacity economically around the world remains truly startling. Climate, of course, continues as a variable that differentially affects so many different aspects that in turn affect life chances and health, whether we're talking about the prevalence of various infectious diseases or the availability of nutrition or the standards of living or the susceptibility to natural disasters and catastrophes of all kinds. These, again, differentiate one country, one place from another. Our political and social environment in which health is embedded is also extraordinarily variable around the world. This particular slide, the different colors illustrate the different types of governance that apply to different countries around the world, but also the ways in which different countries define and approach health as a right or as a privilege, as a matter of constitutional guarantee, or as a matter of individual national choice. This ranges extremely widely around the world. And in fact, a wonderful study that Judy Hyman, the dean at the UCLA School of Public Health, published now over a year ago, looked at the history of constitutional guarantees about health, either as a right to health care or as a right to health more broadly and public health. And it turns out today the U.S. is one of more than 80 countries whose constitutions do not guarantee citizens any kind of health protection. If you think about the U.S. Constitution just for a moment, the body of the Constitution is all about the three branches of government and the powers of the presidency and the way we elect our legislature and how the judiciary is organized. There's actually not a single word in the body of the Constitution about individual rights. It's all about those powers that the states cede to the federal government and otherwise retain as states. And it actually wasn't until after the Civil War that in the United States we began to refer to our nation as the United States, as before the war it was these United States. So it went from plural to singular after the Civil War. But in the Constitution, of the body of the Constitution, there's not a single word about individual rights. It only comes in what we call the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. And in the Bill of Rights, what does it guarantee? Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, the right to assemble and peacefully petition the government, the right to not have your self-incrimination, and so on. All of the rights guaranteed in the United States Constitution are civil and political rights. There's not a single word in the United States Constitution about your right to an education, for example, or your children's right to an education. There's not a word about old age pension. There's not a word about the right to a job. There's certainly nothing in the United States Constitution about a right to health. So in the U.S. context, all of these matters of social and economic justice have always been a matter of political choice, not a guaranteed individual right. And we are still playing out this reality in the United States. So we're actually still playing out the reality of our civil and political rights, but we are certainly playing out the reality of how we practice and believe other rights such as education. You know, it wasn't until well into the 20th century that every state required primary school education for children, for example. Women, of course, didn't have the right to vote until the 19th Amendment. We're still playing out the rights of all minorities to be represented and voting, even after the Civil Rights Act of the mid-50s. So even on civil and political, we are still evolving, but social and economic rights in the United States have never been absolutely guaranteed. Interestingly, Franklin Roosevelt, in his final State of the Union address in January of 1944, actually proposed what he called a second Bill of Rights, which was 8 guarantees about the social and economic status of citizens in the United States, but as with so many other efforts, that didn't go very far. Now, the only thing that is a little bit reassuring about this reality for the United States is that when you look at other countries and how they have stepped up to guarantee health as a right or health care as a right of access, oftentimes those countries that have the right embedded in the Constitution have managed to ignore it. And those countries which fail to include it constitutionally nevertheless have sometimes stepped forward and guaranteed these rights. So ultimately, it will come back to the decisions on the parts of body politics in each individual country about the guarantee and assurance about these rights. The trend, however, as Judy Hyman showed in her paper, is actually pretty reassuring. If you look at constitutions that had been adopted before 1970, only about a third had anything about a health to right or health care. If you go up then after 1970, In that decade to 79, it jumps up to 60% of constitutions. If you go up to the 1980s, it was 75%. It was 1982, for example, when the Mexican Constitution was revised and amended to incorporate a right to health, which was only begun to be realized in practice more than a decade later. But since 2000, of 33 constitutions adopted in the world, only one fails to include a right to health or health care. So although political and social systems vary enormously, the trend is in the right direction. Of course, we have the reality of differential burdens of disease in different countries. Qatar, the wealthiest country, these are the depictions of the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, showing chronic diseases and infectious diseases and diseases of the environment and injury and so on in different colors. But the main point here is that when you look at the forces that create vulnerabilities to health problems, again, they are highly localized and differential from one part of the world to another. And yet the realization of global health is that it is not just a sum of all of these local, particular characteristics and experiences and life chances. It is more than that. And global health is responsive also to global forces that exert influence everywhere. Forces like the information revolution, like the changes for environmental and climate disruption, and the forces of global trade. So, for example, if you look at the world as a whole, the demographic and epidemiologic transition is leading to a squaring of the age distribution of the populations over time. This shows progressively from 1950 to 2010 to 2050 and projected ahead to 2100 in the red outline at the outside of this curve. And you can see that the world population is moving toward an increasing squareness in which the numbers of older living persons will begin to match and come closer to the numbers of younger people being born. If you look at the burden of disease, which is particularly germane to our interests, of course, in global health, and you go from the distribution of the burden a few years ago between high, middle, and income countries. The blue in this slide represents non-communicable diseases, chronic disease burden. And in 2008, if you examine that, you'll see that that's the top row. On the right side, low-income countries, chronic non-communicable diseases represented not yet a majority, but by the year 2030, it's projected that even in low and middle-income countries, chronic non-communicable diseases will represent a majority of the burden of disease in those countries in the world. And so they will, over this next 2 decades, have to contend simultaneously with the continuing burden of infectious diseases and the rising burden of chronic diseases. And these trends, of course, are accompanied by other movements of the population from rural to urban areas, from agricultural to industrial settings, and with a lot of increase in leisure time, which leads to another kind of burden typically in terms of injury and substance abuse and so on around the world. But these are all related to this transition in the demography and in the epidemiology around the globe. And here we're going to be seeing a change in globalization, and I think I do need some help in clicking on the center of this slide, because what this depicts in motion in real time over 24 hours, you can see the sun rise from the east moving to the west, and what this depicts is the movement of air traffic around the globe in one 24-hour period, which is emblematic of the movements of people and goods and diseases and vectors all around the world, and how there is an increasing sharing every day of this movement of so many hundreds of millions of people and billions of kilograms of goods all around the world simultaneously. And one of the things that globalization does allow is the possibility of generation-skipping technology to be applied and deployed to solve different kinds of problems. So many developing countries have not really invested, for example, in the physical infrastructure that undergirds land lines in the United States traditional telephony system, but have jumped right to mobile systems as the dominant mode of communication. And similarly, it can be that increasing developments of point-of-care diagnostics, for example, and other technologies that will bring the benefits of contemporary technology capacity for diagnosis and for treatment and for communication to remote parts of the world is one of those forces that can really make a positive difference for countries in a way that has never been experienced before. If we look at the commonality of environmental change and the threats, particularly around global climate disruption, we're all in the same small sphere of surround of the atmosphere and share the same oceans in the world. This particular slide depicts the contributions to CO2 emissions from different countries. The U.S. in blue was the top up until the present, but China is rapidly moving to overtake the U.S. in terms of total emissions. And of course, this is a climate disruptor that will affect everyone and which remains a source of unfinished business in global diplomacy. Another very important and relevant aspect of globalization from the point of view of our interests in global health is the internationalization of science and the internationalization of research and publication. It is true that in some countries there's been a concerted effort to enhance and invest in science and to encourage scholars and scientists to publish. I understand, and I can't attest to this from a personal experience, but at least it has been reported that in some universities of China, there's a financial recognition of tens of thousands of dollars to the individual who manages to publish a paper in one of the leading scientific journals like Science or Nature. So that puts a very direct financial incentive in front of those scientists who are able to then publish in globally recognized journals. In the U.S., that will sometimes help get you tenure, but not any cash. And so there is a difference, but the reality is that the distribution of the conduct of science and the presence of scientists represented in the world literature has definitely been globalizing, has been equating, has been normalizing, and by and large, this is a very exciting development. Science anywhere is good for science everywhere. It is a matter of reality today, and it's a challenge to the United States, especially in our current policy and practice of stagnant investment in our research establishment, and especially in our biomedical research establishment, of how we move to remain competitive in a world that is advancing very rapidly and globalizing around the conduct of science and the distribution of knowledge relevant to health and to all sciences. It's not just knowledge that is moving, however. This is a depiction of the movement of health professionals from the developing world to the major payers of health professionals, the United States, Western Europe, Australia. And what this slide depicts is that individuals originating from many different parts of the world who manage to get the opportunity and advantage of professional education are nevertheless being attracted in substantial numbers to spend their professional lives and to practice in those countries that are already very well placed with respect to numbers of health professionals. And this represents a significant challenge to policymakers, to educators, to universities, and to clinical settings all around the world. It is a big challenge in the movement and training of health professionals that I want to come back to in just a few minutes. One of the great trends that is less appealing even than the movement of health professionals is the global trend toward increasing inequality in the distribution of income around the world. The Gini coefficient, you know, is a measure of the ratio of the degree of inequality to equality. If everybody had exactly the same income, the coefficient would be 0. If one person had all the income and everybody else had no income, it would be 1. So the higher you go, the worse it is in terms of the inequality of the distribution of income. And what this slide depicts is that most countries in the OECD, the advanced countries of the world, in most of those countries, the distribution of income has been getting more unequal in recent years. There are a few exceptions in that right middle set of countries in France and Belgium, Hungary, not much change, and there are even a few where the inequality has diminished in terms of reported income, like Greece, although I don't think we would recommend that strategy as a means of getting reduction in inequality. But if you look back even at countries in Scandinavia, like Norway and Denmark and Sweden, which are shown on the right side of the main body here, even though they start at a very, very low level of inequality, the trend is in the direction toward increasing inequality. The United States of America is on the far left, the second from the leftmost in this particular set of slides. And by the way, if you went outside of OECD, and in many developing countries, of course, the Gini coefficient is much worse, it's much higher. But the trends here are not in a direction for those who believe in greater equity. Not only is the inequality of income getting worse, but all countries are experiencing comparable pressures, not all to the same degree, but comparable pressures around the costs and expenditures that are lavished on health care and that are required to get the quality of care that the individuals in that country deserves. Here, for example, just showing expenditures on cancer drugs, well, in the United States, between 2008 and 2013, we actually went up 20%. In the world as a whole, the increase for this particular class of expenditure jumped up to 28%. The United States, admittedly, is a radical outlier when it comes to total costs of health care. We spend twice the average per capita compared to the average of OECD countries. We spend 1.5 times per capita what is expended in the most expensive country in terms of health costs. A very interesting study that I would commend to you that was committed to publish last year and a half by Elizabeth Bradley and Lauren Taylor in a book they called The American Health Paradox, based on their earlier study, took the evidence about the expenditures on health, which we often compare relative to life expectancy in different countries, and which shows the United States as this radical outlier. We spend so much more, and our life expectancy in comparison to other OECD countries is not really above the average now of those countries. As you know, more than dozens of countries have even higher or better, I should say, meaning lower, infant mortality compared to the United States as well. But what they showed is if you take not simply expenditures that we normally account in the health column, but you add in the total social expenditures that can promote an environment for health, including investments in education, including old age pensions, including community welfare programs, including disability, and particularly unemployment, and especially parent support in employment, and you add up those expenditures as a fraction of GDP in different countries, you begin to see an array of countries that looks a lot closer to the actual performance on life expectancy, on infant mortality, relative to what you see when you just look at GDP and fractional expenditures for health per se. So the U.S., to put it specifically, spends much, much less as a fraction of GDP on all of these other elements of social support that contribute to health as compared to many other countries in the world. But all countries, the point here, all countries are really facing a similar kind of pressure to get more efficient and to get more value out of their expenditures in health for the future. You may wonder, where did your salad come from? And this is a figure that depicts the national origin of every element in the mixed salad that some of you will enjoy later today at lunch or perhaps at dinner or when you go home. And the main point of this slide is that the food we eat today in the United States is subject to globalization. The points of origin are all over the world. If you look even at drugs manufactured in the United States of America, the majority of ingredients for those drugs originate in other parts of the world. And the main point of this is that the need for regulation and harmonization of approaches around the world for safe food and drugs that undergirds our health is now a universal requirement, even if your only concern is to protect the health of individuals in your own country. 2009 pandemic of H1N1 is a reminder that when it comes to worldwide infectious disease threats, it is a world. This depicts the early points of distribution of H1N1 from its first detection in Mexico in the early weeks and first month and a half of the known outbreak in 2009. And the main point here is, again, partly related to the slide I showed you about travel and the degree of travel around the world, that, again, this is a unitary one-world phenomena, so that we are not in separate worlds when it comes either to the pressures on health and the determinants of health, nor especially when it comes to the threat of pandemics. And so what is it in this kind of combined environment in which local individual conditions still ultimately determine health in localities, and we have nevertheless a whole series of globalizing forces, from demography to transportation to the spread of infectious diseases to the shared responsibilities to deliver health and to do it in an affordable way? What is the role of universities in trying to find our way through these combined challenges? And I believe, as I know all of you do by virtue of being here, that universities have an absolutely central role, a vital role, in the protection and the promotion of global health. And I would just summarize today 5 ways in which the universities, working individually and especially working together, can make the difference for global health. The first is that universities remain in our society still the principal engines of discovery and research on new solutions that will apply and make a difference for health. Universities cannot do this alone, but universities still remain the places where the fundamental research that undergirds new technology to promote and protect health is designed. Universities remain the places that are designing health systems and health systems reform to deliver care in a better way. Universities are the places that are working alone and together with others to test and evaluate these solutions in their applications around the world. And so from the point of innovation at all levels, all the way through to implementation and translation and regulation, all of these elements of discovery and application remain centrally the mission and responsibility of our universities. Secondly, universities are at their heart institutions responsible for education, for training, for preparation. Universities, I believe, have a special responsibility when it comes to health professionals and the distributions and training of health professionals in different parts of the world. Universities are the places that prepare individuals for leadership at all levels and engagement in the solutions of these problems. So universities working together and designing individual programs are the places that prepare the next generation of leaders to help make progress and to solve these problems. Thirdly, I would like to emphasize really six-fold relationships of partnership that universities play a key role as one of the critical players, and oftentimes as the one with a degree of neutrality and vision amongst the faculty and students to be a focal point for establishing partnerships across government and universities and industry and NGOs and philanthropy and international multinational organizations, the World Health Organization, Food and Agriculture Organization, International Labor Organization, and their like. So think of this kind of hexagonal space with universities, governments, industry, NGOs, philanthropies, and multinationals as all being capable of working either in concert or at odds in solving these problems. And I would submit that universities are in a particularly strong position to take the first step and to meet others more than halfway. And these partnerships, of course, are among universities within a country, but even more so across countries, north to north, north to south, south to south. They're in every direction, and universities can be the place that extends the capacities of all of these relevant players so that the achievements are more than what any individual institution, to be sure, or even any individual sector could accomplish on its own. I believe universities have a particular responsibility today in the form of civic leadership, taking responsibility not just in our local communities where university and community relations have long been a responsibility, but also in being the advocates and champions for global health, for making progress against these enormous challenges of globalization, as well as meeting the needs of individual countries around the world. Universities can be the place that foster the outspoken voices and protect the ability of individuals who care deeply and wish to speak out to have a base which is protected, a base which is not vulnerable to political whim or to commercial influence, that can speak out and advocate for the needs of global health. And university, finally, can be the place that instills and preserves the values that undergird public health and global health. Universities can be the places that champion equity in the world. Universities can be the places that look to respect and dignity by both what we say and how we ourselves behave with respect to others. Universities can be the places that champion the life chances and the health of every individual in the world. And so, in the consortium of Universities for Global Health, if we can continue to focus on those particular problems which affect individual countries in their local circumstance and solve those problems, if we can also come to grips with the global forces that affect all of us and that in turn have a profound influence on the life chances of everyone, and if universities can preserve and advance the values that undergird all of our commitment to global health, then the consortium of universities in global health will truly be making a positive difference. Thank you all very much.
Well, first I want to thank Harvey, as always, for a very enlightening talk. That guy, yeah, don't. Second, I want to thank him for giving a shout out to UCLA. Way to go. Third, I would like to invite Ann Kurtz of NYU up on the stage and Judy Wasserheit to join us in presenting the CUGH Distinguished Leadership Award to Harvey. I also want to thank NYU for a very generous grant to support Harvey's presentation today. But you have a wonderful demonstration of why he remains such an inspiration to all of us. So thank you very much, Harvey.
This is wonderful.
Yeah. You're welcome. So Dr. Martin, I don't know what we're supposed to do next.
Wasn't that fantastic? I have to say, we're going to have a fantastic presentation now with the relationship that we built with Canada, with the Gairdner Global Health Awards. But before I say that, just on a personal note, Dr. Fineberg, as someone who's personally as a physician and as somebody who was in politics for a long time, and as an individual yourself as a globally recognized leader in academia, you bring something that very few people do. You bring the humanity to what we're all trying to do. You take the complex and bring it to a simple, powerful message that deals with the heart of what we're all trying to do here, which is to improve the lives who are least privileged in this world. And you take the science and you translate that into the human. And so I think for all of us here again, we really want to thank you very much for what you have done, what you are doing, and what you will do in the future in the next iteration. Thank you very much. One of the things we've done at the Consortium of Universities for Global Health is to build relationships. And one of the things we have done is build, I think, a new relationship with an incredible organization in Canada called the Gairdner Global Health Awards System. And these awards and the awardees, a lot of them actually go on to winning Nobel Prizes. And Dr. John Dirks, who is the head of the Gairdner Awards program, is here today. And what he has done with us is he has established a new relationship that has enabled us to be able to showcase some of the finest awardees in global health around the world. And we're extremely privileged today to have 3 extraordinary individuals who have been awarded Gairdner Global Health Awards and been a part of their system for a long time. 3 individuals who are world leaders in science, world leaders in health, and world leaders in international relations. So if I may call up Dr. John Dirks to tell us a little bit about the Gairdner Global Health Awards, and you're going to be in for a real treat because you're going to get a number of exceptional speakers who've done exceptional things. Dr. Dirks.
Thank you, Keith. I might ask Dr. Holmes and Dr. Fagey to come to the front. Dr. Amura, who wanted to know the time when to arrive, and I said 9:30. I'm sure he'll be momentarily, knowing that he's very precise. So we'll just begin here as soon as we're seated and introduce the subject. I'm very grateful to Keith Martin and the directors of CUGH for inviting the Gairdner Foundation and the Canada Gairdner Awards to participate in this plenary session. The Gairdner Foundation has 2 broad missions. The first mission is to recognize those who in biomedical sciences, whether it's basic, clinical, or population health, that have made seminal discoveries or on occasion sustained contributions to biomedical science. And second, our goal is to participate in Canada and abroad in science culture. In Canada, we are linked at the end of October when we have our events at 22 universities across the land. And we have our winners speak to to faculty, to graduate students, and to high school students. And in the case of high school students, it's the sort of a one-off to see a star in research, speak to the students, to say, I want to tell you how I became a scientist. What were the factors that determined this? And then second question is, what is it that brought about the question that I've answered and for which I'm receiving the award? And I'm told that this is actually a moment of stimulation, and we've all encountered that in our own life. A single event may make a big difference. So the Gairdners, to give a little history, for those who are not familiar, started in 1959 when the Toronto stockbroker James Gairdner was prompted by his personal physician, a rheumatologist. Mr. Gairdner had rheumatic arthritis, and he was asked to establish an international award. And from that very beginning, the award was worldwide. The idea was anybody from the world could nominate. They couldn't nominate themselves. They had to be alive, and you had to come to the presentation to receive the award. The second thing that he did, which was right, was to say, I'm a businessman, I can't pick scientists. Let the best scientists pick the awardees. And so this has been a principle of the Gairdner Award. Initially, they were all Canadians who picked them. In the last 20 years, we've internationalized their adjudication committees extensively so that they are representatives not only from Canada, but from the United States, a number of European countries, Asia, and countries like Japan and Australia. And this has served us well, as it gives that balance of discussion at our various adjudication meetings. Now, we're in our 55th year, and for the most of that time, we have really focused on an award that we call the Canada Gairdner International Award. And it is given for discovery-type science. It can be basic, it can be clinical, it can be population health. Basic science tends to dominate. And out of these awards have come various discoveries, the DNA, various aspects of genes, the genome, details of the immune system, stem cells. It's a long list. And names come up like Watson and Crick, Goldstein, Kendall, Yamanaka, you could go on. And as mentioned by Keith Martin, a very nice side outcome has been 82 times. They've also gone on to Stockholm. Now, our awardees contribute, as I said, very extensively to science across Canada, and that has been a particular forte. In 2009, on the occasion of our 50th anniversary, we decided we would establish a Canada Gairdner Global Health Award. Through personal experience and through input, we realized that this was a neglected area. Recognition, to our mind, is very crucial. And so we developed this Global Health Award, and like the others, each of one of these awards has international adjudication and has a prize for personal use of $100,000 each. I'll just pause to let Dr. Amura come to the stage. Again, the award is science-based. Again, science in any domain, and of course what has come forth very readily is that it is population health that has tended to dominate. This year we have a specific discovery. The selection process is again carried out by a Global Health Advisory Committee consisting of 15 international scientists, and you have among you in this room Dr. Roger Glass, Peter Piot, and Heidi DeBass, who are members of that committee. And again, it's a global committee. We have some material that we can disseminate. It'll be on the desk that Keith Martin mentioned, where we'll give information about recent winners and how to nominate for the Global Health Prize, which has a deadline of October 1st. Now, since we began in 2009, we've honored important fields. In 2009, Nubia Minoz for human papillomavirus. In 2010, Nick White of Thailand for artemisinin and malaria. In 2011, Bob Black of Johns Hopkins for reducing childhood diarrheal disease and dealing with matters of malnutrition. In 2012, we had Brian Greenwood from West Africa and the United Kingdom for his work on actually proving that bed nets were preventative in malaria, and that he also made major contributions to childhood pneumonia and meningitis with his vaccine trials. And last year, our awardee was our own King Holmes. He is the William Fogey Chair in Global Health at the University of Washington, a major builder of this organization, CUGH, and he received his work for bringing STDs and HIV into a scientific discipline like no one else. He's had an enormous impact in the developing world. He's had a huge number of fellows. He's mentored many. And last year, when he came to Canada to participate in our national program and in our awards, he became an instant rock star. Everywhere he went at the universities, out of the woods, as it were, came former colleagues, many admirers. He has coattails like no one else I've ever seen. And the high school students loved him in particular. I think it was his vocabulary, or maybe it was the titles of his books. But anyways, he was an instant hit. He knew how to relate to young people, which is all of our obligation. And when we had the ceremonial dinner on October 24th, he came to the podium as his chosen music was played, Healthy Sexuality by Marvin Gaye. He was greeted by thunderous applause, and I ask you to do that again. King Holmes.
Well, thank you very much, John, for that wonderful introduction. We are here next to celebrate the 2014 Canada Gairdner Foundation Global Health Award and to meet our 2014 awardee, Professor Satoshi Amuro from the Kitasato University in Japan. And when I received the printed brochure for this meeting, the program, I discovered to my surprise that I'd been scheduled to speak about scientific contributions to STD here. But don't panic, I'm not going to do that. We're really here to celebrate the foundation, and John asked me to talk about to say a few words about the award, what the experience has been like, and what really the Gairdner Foundation provides to the awardees. So for me, first of all, it was wonderful to celebrate this today at the annual CUGH meeting for the first time and to meet the awardee here. Canada really is a very prominent part of CUGH, and this particular award has become the most prominent award for global health as conducted anywhere in the world. So it seemed natural, and we're really grateful to John for making this the venue now for presenting the Gairdner Global Health Award. Last year, I visited 6 Canadian cities. It was during October when they have these celebrations, so it's the beautiful period of time in one of the beautiful periods of time in Canada. Countryside is beautiful. I met with colleagues from my field in all of these 6 universities, and both from academia and also from global health agencies in some of the cities. I think one of the highlights was actually learning to speak to these high school students. I was a little bit intimidated by the concept because I haven't done much talking to high school students, but you get a lot of assistance from the foundation, Dr. Omura, and they told me exactly how to engage high school students. And so I followed their advice, and as I was looking at the audience while I was speaking, I noticed some of the high school students were yawning. And then I kept going on, and I noticed that some of them were texting. And then when I looked and saw that one of them was snoring, I realized I was not probably following the best approach. So I actually talked to 6 groups of students ranging in number from 90 students to 450 students. But for the second group of 90 students, I tried a different approach, and I showed them the cover of the book that John just mentioned, which was the first book I ever published with a colleague. And I wrote it for my children, and it was entitled How to Have Intercourse Without Getting Screwed. And the students actually woke up. It was great. My children actually were pre-high school when I wrote this book for them, so they didn't fully appreciate it at the time. But, and then I asked the students, I said I would give a small award to each of the students who would come up to the microphone and name one of the 7 STDs that was most likely to be fatal. At which point they began taking out their pens and papers and started writing. So that was the approach I learned to dealing with high school students, and it was okay. So then they treat you royally, and by royally I mean literally royally, in Canada when you're receiving this award and going from university to university. And the best example of this was when the past president of the University of Manitoba took a group of us to the Manitoba Club, and he had directed the club to put the name tags in front of each of our plates, not to put our titles, you know, professor so-and-so or degrees, MDs, etc., just to put the name. So everybody else that had their full name, John Dirks, etc., my name tag just said Holmes. And I have to say, it's the first time I've ever been treated like a real king. It was wonderful. So and then you go on to finally a wonderful symposium in Toronto, where lots of colleagues came to speak. One of them was actually a video that Roger Glass had made in Kenya with Bishop Paul, who's a colleague of some of ours. And then Patty Garcia, who was able to come there, had done a video of some of our trainees in Peru. And both of those were very moving, I have to say. And the award was actually presented at the formal dinner in Toronto. And as John said, you had to choose a song to be played as you walked up to receive the award. And I consulted with the head of our student services team, Darren Wade, who's a Zumba expert, and I wanted to be really current, you know, and he suggested Marvin Gaye's song, which was entitled, actually, John, Sexual Healing. And when I called John to suggest this title, I wanted to get it cleared, and there was a very long pause on the other end of the phone. And he said, well, let me think about it. But actually, eventually, he did play the song, and he actually showed a few moves as I was, you remember that? As I was coming up to the podium. So I would just have to say that the whole experience was unforgettable. It was very professional, useful, and I think inspiring and fun. So much fun that John and I have talked, and I have plans to, with Gairdner Foundation support, go back to the eastern part of Canada, which is beautiful, but I've never visited, for next year's event. So that's how much I liked it. So I just want to thank John Dirks and the Gairdner Foundation for this unforgettable experience, and give my congratulations to Professor Amora for his contribution to global health, for his contribution to the discovery of the ivermectins as a class of antiparasitic drugs, and for being selected for the 2014 Gairdner Global Health Award. So congratulations to you, and thank you all.
Thank you, Kink. He's the ideal prize winner. But one aspect of Gairdner that's a characteristic, we developed sort of a family of Gairdner winners. So you're always subject to recall. So King is coming back to the Atlantic provinces and this fall because, as I said, he's become a rock star in science, and he's helped us a lot, and I expect this to continue for a long time. I'm very pleased to now introduce Professor Omura, who is the 2014 Gairdner Global Health Awardee. Professor Satoshi Omura is a distinguished emeritus professor at Kitasato University in Tokyo. Professor Omura has had a prodigious career as a chemist in microbiology and is responsible for the chemical structure of over 400 compounds that are derived from natural products. So this is a lifetime of work. And this is truly a case, like Louis Pasteur said many years ago, chance favors the prepared mind. An individual who was prepared to handle samples of soil that might contain natural products that could be antibiotics, lipid-lowering agents, maybe even an ivermectin, as it turned out. So of these many compounds, the microorganism that was isolated from a soil sample at a golf course in near Ito, Japan, one time only. This is the remarkable thing. It never happened again. One time only, but nothing would have happened thereafter unless the person who was handling that sample knew what to do. And that's what happened. And there's a whole train of individuals, the Merck Company, NGOs, World Health, Carter Foundation, that have been involved in taking this to its fullest stretch. But this is a case where that first spadeful began something that might not have happened otherwise. So Dr. Omura has had this remarkable career and this remarkable organism that when he had an early partnership with Merck, stimulated by his association with the head of Merck Research in the 50s and 60s, Max Tischler, who, believe it or not, produced a whole variety of compounds himself very successfully. Imagine riboflavin, streptomycin, cortisone, and so on. He was a mentor to Professor Omura. And they developed this contractual arrangement so that when these soil samples were put in pure fermentation vials, they could be tested and screened. And at Merck, they developed the effective compound, ivermectin, which then was found very successful for helminths, parasites of various kinds, first for animals, which was a huge industry in itself, and then for human diseases, discovered later, initiated by Bill Campbell and others at that point. And it's a huge story, which Dr. Omura and then Dr. Fege later will follow up to talk about. So what have we? A prepared mind, a spadeful of dirt, a successful partnership, a major company, and many individuals involved who implemented treatment and changed for the first time diseases that had been with many peoples on riverbanks in hot countries since the beginning of time, made them poor, and now turned this around. So this is a story. It's one of the remarkable stories of modern medicine. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Professor Omura.
Good morning. Thank you very much for very kind introductions. May I start by saying that it is a great honor and personal delight for me to be here today. My work in the discovery, development, and delivery of ivermectin is the reason that I have been fortunate enough to receive this year's Gairdner Global Health Award. So today, I'd like to share with you a little of my joy, pride, and amazement with what is increasing being referred to as wonder drug. How to? Okay. My work has led to the discovery of over 470 novel chemicals. 26 have been widely used as a drug for human and animal health or as biological reagents. Several have been forerunners of major medicine, such as statin and novel anti-cancer agent. Over 100 compounds have been synthesized. But all these compounds, the ivermectin have been the most unique and most exceptional. Ivermectin and its derivatives are the result of work by diverse, highly skilled and committed group of people. It all started with such research collaboration I set up with Merck Company in 1973. As shown here, Merck Tissue was a key factor. I would not be here today, but for his kind and constant advice, guidance, and friendship. All the individuals and agencies named here to play a significant part in the advent of ivermectin. We started out looking for something useful in animal health. The result, ivermectin, appeared in 1981. Nobody could have foreseen the enormous unmatched benefit that it would later have in human health. This collaboration with Merck represented by the world's first major public-private partnership. Ivermectin itself was approved for human use in 1987. The innovative drug donation programs was the world's first, largest, most successful, and longest running, a groundbreaking model for all other that followed. This image indicates the source of ivermectin and the process involved. In 1973, a sample of soil was taken from the near golf course in Japan. It was cultured, microorganisms isolated, tested for bioactivity, and later microscopically identified. Promising organisms were freeze-dried, ready for creation of the fertilization process for testing. Despite continuous searching worldwide, the organism that I found in this single soil sample is the only source of ivermectin ever discovered. The organism I found shows significant activity in our screening system, so I sent it to Merck in 1974. Using their customized animal model and screened, the active compound was isolated in 1975, and we named it ivermectin. Ivermectin was the world's first insecticide, a completely novel class of anti-parasitic agent active against a wide range of internal and external organisms. The word insecticide was created just to define this compound. Merck's chemists manipulated the compound and in 1977 produced a very potent dihydroderivative. This was ivermectin, a revolutionary drug, unprecedented and phenomenal in so many ways. This was the original range of ivermectin activity, but As I will show later, we may soon have to revise this. Ivermectin has a massive impact in animal health, produce quickly become a market leader for livestock and pet worldwide, continually earning over $1 billion in sales each year. Income that was very useful for both Merck and Kitasato. However, this was not the end of the story, just a new beginning. Merck scientists, working with the World Health Organization and the United Nations Agency, soon discovered that ivermectin was the ideal tool to tackle a disease that had devastated human population in the tropics for centuries. Onchocerciasis is also known as river blindness. It causes ill health and blindness. It prevents social and economical development in all endemic areas. In the late 1980s, 120 million mostly poor people had no way to combat the disease. No suitable drug existed for treatment. Onchocerciasis results from the infection with Onchocerca volvulus, filarial parasite transmitted via the bite of Simurium blackfly. In humans, countless immature forms are released by female worms. They migrate through the body, causing skin disease, constant itching, eye damage, and eventually blindness. Ivermectin was the perfect solution. It kills immature worms and delays females from releasing more. This helps stop the transmission and safely ease the symptoms of those being treated. A single dose eradicated immature worms after 1 month, patient remaining free of worms for up to a year. Ivermectin does not kill adult worms. It has to be taken annually for about 15 years, allowing enough time for adults to die naturally. In an unprecedented gesture, in 1987, Merck agreed to donate ivermectin under the brand name Meclizan, free of charge for the treatment of river blindness for as long as it was needed. The Kitasato Institute happily agreed to forego all royalty. The donation was yet another incredible first for ivermectin. Ivermectin is extremely safe and effective. Specialized community-directed treatment system was devised to distribute the tablet in Africa. Ivermectin is so safe, local villagers with only minimal training can dispense tablets. Now, community-directed mass drug treatment is widespread. It ensures that people in remote rural communities who must need the drug actually get it. So let us now move to the present. How successful has ivermectin been? This is a summary of the benefit for 2015 projected by African programs for onchocerciasis control called APOC. Some 90 million people will be being treated annually. 120 million at risk will be protected. Blindness will have been reduced by 68%, and severe skin disease almost eliminated. It is estimated that this disease will soon be eliminated globally as a public health problem, mostly thanks to ivermectin. But the story does not stop there. Lymphatic filariasis result from the infection with other parasitic worms transmitted via mosquito bite. Latest figures show an estimated 20% of world population at risk of infection. Of the 120 million currently infected, 1/3 are discured or disabled. Ivermectin in combination with albendazole, another donated drug, proved very effective against this parasite too. The ivermectin donation programs being extended in 2000 to cover this disease. Some 270 million total treatments were approved for 2012. It is likely that more Africans are taking ivermectin than any other drug and doing so annually to improve their health and their standard of living. Lymphatic filariasis should no longer be public health problems by 2020, and onchocerciasis by 2025. Like hundreds of millions of Africans, these children are lucky. They will never suffer the horrors of either liver blindness or lymphatic filariasis, all thanks to ivermectin, and massive international collaborations involving a wide diversity of essential partners from all walks of life. That remarkable and unmatched achievement is due to the provision of over 2 billion free ivermectin tablets. All these tablets were produced from the organism I discovered. Remarkably, and a great omen for the future, despite 25 years of monotherapy, no ivermectin resistance has yet been found in humans. Again, this is not the end of the story. Besides being the primary weapon in two global disease elimination programs, ivermectin is being used ever more widely, now available in commercial preparations. It is a drug of choice for treating strong iliasis, which afflict over 300 million people annually. It is also being used to combat scurvy, another global problem affecting over 130 million people. And it is increasingly used to free community of head lice. Altogether, hundreds of millions of people are regularly using ivermectin to overcome a variety of health problems. So what will the future bring? This slide gives an indication of abundant and as yet unexploited promise. The ivermectin and ivermectin are uniquely able to kill a range of parasites as well as disease vectors. Ivermectin itself continues to astonish us, demonstrating activity against several other neglected tropical diseases. It now appears to have antibacterial and antiviral properties and may even combat one form of cancer. This further enhances its reputation as a wonder drug, a unique compound that I could never have imagined when I started my voyage of discovery all those years ago. Various sectors of society in Japan have also benefited significantly from ivermectin, directly and indirectly. For example, part of the substantial royalty we received were used to build this 440-bed hospital, nursing college, and vaccine production plant in the district, which had almost no medical facilities. Today, the hospital handles over 1,000 patients daily. The fund also allows us to develop the first hearing art concept hospital in Japan. My own work has always been governed by the belief that nature and its microorganisms hold all the chemicals that we could possibly need for us to lead healthy and productive lives. We just haven't found them yet, and I am determined to keep searching. Finally, I would like to once again express my sincere gratitude for being chosen as the recipient of the 2014 Gairdner Global Health Award, an award I humbly accept on behalf of all those who have helped on every step of wonderful journey and who are all part of extraordinary ivermectin story. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Amura, for your brilliant work, and you can see the immediate appeal that it's had to an audience that understands what this means. And that's why we're going to have Dr. Bill Foege speak next. To discover something I said from a spadeful that launches as in essence 1,000 ships, you need to get the medication to the patient. And who better than Dr. William Foege to speak to us, one of the exceptional international global health leaders of our time. A person who was there during the eradication of smallpox, a major leader, who led CDC, who developed in 1984 with colleagues a task force for child survival with WHO, UNICEF, World Bank, UNDP, Rockefeller Foundation, and others. This has been a major project. A person who's been focused on eradicating diseases, not impossible. Guinea worm, polio, measles, river blindness. It's a great story. So he's going to talk today from a policy angle, as it were, perhaps, pharmacophilanthropy, the latest, greatest chapter in global health. Please welcome Dr. William Foege.
Thank you very much. What an honor to speak at this point. I was raised to respect my elders. And in recent years, I've had a great deal of difficulty finding them. And so my usual job is to be historian, and I don't mind that. I enjoy being a historian for this story. Polybius was a Greek historian, and then he was captured by the Romans, and so he became a Roman historian. And he said at one point that it may have been possible in the past for things to have happened in isolation. But he said, 2,000 years ago, but from this time forth, the world must be seen as an organic whole where everything affects everything. And then he gave examples of things happening in Africa impacting Athens. And so today you've just heard a Polybius story where things happening in Japan impacted Africa. And it's a wonderful Polybius story. And I'm going to, since you've heard it now, I'm just going to round out some of the pieces. I mean, it's remarkable that this came from a golf course in Japan and then shared with Merck. And they developed a drug they called HeartGuard for heartworm in dogs. And so the American dog owners could now go from giving a drug every day for heartworm to a drug once a month. And those of you with dogs know that when you bought HeartGuard, you got a red heart, and you put that on your calendar, and you knew which day to give the drug. And then Bill Campbell and others started asking the question, what could be the impact for humans? At that time, Roy Vagelos was head of research at Merck, and they went to him to ask for money to explore the possibilities in Africa. They actually figured out ahead of time that they would not make money on a human drug for onchocerciasis, and yet, because Roy Vagelos is a good scientist, but he's also a corporate humanitarian, he released money, and a scientist from the subcontinent, Mohammed Aziz, and thousands of Africans then tested out this drug. And as you know, it turned out to be very effective, more effective in humans even than in dogs. You only had to give it once a year rather than every month to prevent the blindness from onchocerciasis. So Merck actually had a dilemma at this point because they now had a drug that was so good and so cheap and went to the poorest people in the world only once a year. They could not make money on it. But Roy Vagelos is now the CEO of Merck, and he made the decision to give this drug away free, and his board backed him up. He assumed at the time that he would be giving it to WHO. And he went to WHO and became very frustrated with the bureaucracy, and this never ended up in fruition. Undaunted, he went to USAID, and he offered them the same deal that he had offered WHO. Merck would give the drug free if they would figure out how to distribute it. USAID just said no. And so now he is daunted when he realizes he may not even be able to give this drug away free. So he sent his people to Atlanta to the Task Force for Child Survival, which was at that time working with the UN agencies to improve the immunization rates for children. They presented the possibility they would give this drug free if we would figure out how to distribute it. We had three major questions. Number one, how long would they give it free? Number two, what are the side effects when you start giving this to many, many people? And number three, how do you convince people to take it if the results are not seen for years or even decades? Well, the answers, first, Merck said, we will give this free as long as it's needed for onchocerciasis. Number two, we set up surveillance systems for 72 hours in villages to see what were the adverse effects. We lowered that from 72 hours to 48 hours and then to 24 hours, and then we stopped it. This is one of the safest drugs that's ever been developed. But number three, how do you get people to take it if the result, which is no blindness, isn't seen for decades? It turns out people with onchocerciasis, many of them, are itching all day long. It's the first thing they know in the morning, it's the last thing they know at night. And it drives them to distraction. And I've actually lived in West Africa and seen people just scratching and scratching. For some of these people, One dose of Mectizan gave them the first itch-free day that they could ever remember. And then, as you heard, this drug is good for other things. And so it's 100% effective against roundworms, and people know when they've been treated for roundworms. And so it markets itself in many ways. The implementation, it was decided to make this as simple as possible. And so there was a Mectizan expert committee that decided on applications, whether they should be approved or not. There was no great bureaucracy. And we asked for only 5 things. 1, show that this will not be diverted into the market. Show that you know how to figure out which people need treatment. Show you know the dosage to give them. And then make sure you have minimal record keeping to show how many people have gotten this. But finally, number 5, the Ministry of Health has to approve every application so that the ministry is totally involved, even if they're using NGOs to do the delivery. Everything was faster than we could have imagined. Our goal was to try to reach 6 million people in 6 years. We reached 6 million in 4 years. And then it accelerated. And I went to Africa for the celebration of the 250 millionth treatment, which was held in Tanzania. And last year we celebrated 25 years of the program and learned that they'd already given over 1 billion treatments for onchocerciasis. So a remarkable thing has happened. At the 25th anniversary, I mentioned the advantage of having a corporation give a drug free and then having as your marketing agent a US president. President Jimmy Carter used to go to heads of state in Africa and talk about onchocerciasis. Remarkably, if the head of state becomes interested in onchocerciasis, I can tell you the Minister of Health will become interested. And marketing is easy. So how is this program unique? It's unique because it doesn't answer to a UN agency, WHO or UNICEF or any other. So it doesn't have the overhead. But it's also unique in the inexpense of application. In many places, these are village workers who distribute and keep records, and they have the village memory of what this disease used to do. So what does Merck get out of all of this? Well, they get a little bit of good publicity, and they get a little bit of a tax break. But what they really get was something they had not anticipated, which is a loyal workforce who likes working for a company that does this sort of thing. So what's the influence they've had on other companies? Well, you already heard something about lymphatic filariasis, and let me tell you the story of that. We were having a Mectizan expert committee in France. It was late in the afternoon on a Thursday. Eric Otteson from WHO presented a paper on the use of albendazole and Mectizan for lymphatic filariasis. And the question was, who makes albendazole? The answer, SmithKline Beecham. Does anyone know anyone in the company high enough up to give us free drug so that we can try this on a mass basis? No one did. But we broke for dinner and everyone is talking about this new possibility of lymphatic filariasis. The next morning, Friday morning, it's 10 o'clock in France, I'm chairing the meeting, someone puts a note in front of me, Jimmy Carter's on the phone, will you take the call? So we had a coffee break. And President Carter said, it's 5 o'clock in the morning in Atlanta, but I'm so excited I had to talk to you. He asked, does the name Jan Leschly mean anything to you? And I said, no. He said, I had dinner with him last night in Washington, D.C., and he is the CEO of a company called SmithKline Beecham. He told me how impressed he was with what this had done to the loyalty of workers at Merck, and he asked President Carter, do you have any idea of something SmithKline Beecham could do? By that afternoon, we had a commitment of albendazole. That was the beginning of the lymphatic filariasis program. So this is the latest exciting chapter. Other companies now give things. The Task Force for Global Health will this year receive from many corporations about $2 billion worth of products. So Merck was the beginning of this trend, but see where it has led. It's the latest chapter. And now you see why this is a polybius story. It involves Japan and the subcontinent, the US and Africa. It involves a new way of doing global health. It involves so many people, but it's more than a polybius story. Harvey talked about how these United States became the United States. Gary Wills says he can actually tell you the moment that that happened. He said it was the Gettysburg Address. The day after Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address, he is in the White House and he happens to be sick with smallpox. But the day before, the person who preceded him at the Gettysburg Address, Everett, who was a very, very brilliant person, talked for 2 hours. And the day after the Gettysburg Address, Everett wrote a note to President Lincoln. And he said, I would flatter myself if I thought I came as close in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes to the core of why we were there. And the person that wrote this account said, that is remarkable. Mediocrity doesn't see above itself, but the superior mind immediately recognizes genius. And so the story we've heard today is the hope that the collective mind of global health people, the superior mind of global health people, will recognize the genius of incorporating everyone, corporations, academic institutions, governments, UN agencies, bilateral agencies, church groups, NGOs, people of all kinds, to be part of this coalition for global health equity. Thank you.
I want to thank Dr. Faggy on behalf of all of you for that remarkable story. How this was all put together to give medications to those who never conceived it possible. And with it, to thank not only the discoverers in Tokyo and those at Merck, and those but Merck who were generous in making drugs available, and other companies that followed suit, and the leading people involved. It gives you pride in what one can do to help devastating diseases in the world. It gives you pride in the profession. It's a key moment. It's one that I hope that we can savor for a long time to come. And I'm glad that you are all here. And the Gairdner Foundation and its awards is very proud to be a part of it. Thank you very much for being here. Keith Martin doesn't want a minute go by. He says there's an opportunity for questions or comments or experiences in this field. We have till 10:30. So who would like to raise some questions or make some points relating to this whole idea of discovering drugs relevant to the third world, as it were, but also in terms of delivering our knowledge directly to those afflicted?
Hi, my name is Matthew Rosenstein. I'm an incoming medical student at Duke and don't have very much experience in this area and probably shouldn't be asking a question, but your work is very inspiring to me, and the way that you've each changed the world gets me so excited. And so my question is, to what extent did connecting with individual people on the ground influence your work, influence the direction that you took with your research? and then ultimately influence your ability to make an impact.
So that question directed to?
That was directed to all the panelists. Whoever
Okay.
would like to share thoughts on it.
Dr. Amura, do you want to comment? We'll get you a mic.
Originally, the ivermectin believed that it's only active against the parasite. But recently, some people reported the ivermectin effective against Mycobacterium tuberculosis. And also, another people reported that also this inhibit the for maybe viral producing cells. So anyway, this organism's activity now this widely spread. So we are very expecting that the ivermectin also became useful campaign, not only the anti-parasitic agent, another neglected tropical disease.
Thank you, Dr. Murray. Dr. Faggy, would you comment?
Do I have this working? Okay. Oh, thank you. The reason that you go to school, I think, is for three things. You're trying to develop a life philosophy, you're trying to develop skills, and you're trying to develop knowledge. Most of the time we spend at school is transferring knowledge. But when it comes to philosophy, philosophy is forever, and it isn't easily transmitted in school. Skills are for a lifetime. And so philosophy, I think, is really transmitted through mentors, and that's what your question is, how do other people influence you? And so I tell students to deliberately find mentors, because the people they want to emulate are usually so busy they're not looking for others to be mentees. But King Holmes is just an example of a mentor that's taken on more and more people, and so I tell students, seek him out. And ask him a question in his field and thank him. And then go back 3 weeks later and ask him another question. And I said, pretty soon you will have a mentor.
That's why all those students have been coming to. I think the title of the chair of global health at the University of Washington is the William Faggy Chair of Global Health. And I know that at Emory, there is also a William Faggy professor of global health, I think. And I actually think this creates the possibility that all of our positions in global health, whatever university we're at, should be called the William Faggy Chair of Global Health at UCLA and so on, because he is such a fantastic man.
Well, and you said you were from Duke, so seek out Mike Merson.
Okay.
And ask him a question about diarrheal disease.
All right, I will definitely do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Faggy. His question right here.
Yeah, hi. Alistair Matheson from the University of Washington. My question's for Dr. Faggy, and it's in this age of continued consolidation in the pharmaceutical industry, with this week Pfizer looking to swallow up AstraZeneca, which itself was AstraZeneca before they merged. Do you see the continued commitment to these programs, these donation programs? Do you think that will continue with increased consolidation?
I'm not a great predictor of what will happen in the marketplace. To me, the people who believe in the marketplace really think it's the end-all of everything. And from my perspective, I think the people who believe in the marketplace believe in magic. It was made up by people. It's not science. And so I don't know what will happen with companies, but I think this idea that they see employee loyalty is so important these days, and that's the way you get it, by doing good things. Now, the other thing is, when I first started working with Merck, every time I would present at a public health meeting, someone would get up and criticize me for working with people who the bottom line is profit. And I finally ended up saying to them, there is so much altruism in the people who work in corporations and in corporations themselves that we underestimate. And then just to be sure that I made my point, I would say just the way we underestimate the amount of greed in global health workers and church workers, that we have to use all of these people. And I believe that we are making corporate donations an important part of global health, and they're seeing this. So I expect this to continue no matter what happens with consolidations.
Thank you. Question over here.
It's more a comment and a special thanks. Pat Conrad, I'm at the School of Veterinary Medicine at the University of California, Davis, and we've heard a lot about the impact of ivermectin and the ivermectins on human disease, onchocerciasis, but I think what many people may not realize is that this drug revolutionized the treatment of parasites for a wide variety of animals, and really, particularly in the livestock industry. It put a lot of parasitologists out of business. I'm grateful I'm a protozoologist, so, and ivermectin doesn't work as well on protozoa as it has on helminths, but I just want to draw attention to the fact that this is another place where veterinary medicine and human medicine are so closely related, and I think Merck's success in the animal field, treating pet animals and then on to livestock and other companion animals, I think really laid the groundwork for this. And I'd just like to thank Dr. O'Meara and Merck for all that they've done for treating parasites of all animals. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So John, Pat is a member of the CUGH board and illustrates the importance that CUGH gives to the concept of One Health. And this presentations today really illustrate that as well. And that is the importance of linking animal health and human health together.
You know, it's interesting in the case of the Gairdner Awards over the years, there used to be more medically oriented or basic labs, but now it's all of life sciences, the whole biology of life, as it were, that is up for discussion. If you take something like the biological clock, where we had our winners 3 years ago, all that's basically in slime and Drosophila and nematodes. And we have the same clock, just a bit more sophisticated. So that it's education. I think you've made your point very well. So there's a question. I guess you're the next.
Hi, this is Rick Berzon with the NIH, and I just wanted to follow up on, Bill, some of your remarks and some of your philosophy. And King, I think also your thoughts on this would also be useful. But I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for about a dozen years and had quite a lot of interactions with the government, and then later and have joined the government, obviously. And we talk a lot about learning from each other in terms of our models and systems and the way we do things and so forth. And I know, Bill, you've talked about this before in your remarks because I've heard you say it many times. This issue of what really gets down to trust between different ways of trying to look at the world and solve problems. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on, other than the obvious and leading by example, what your thoughts are on how we can get people to work together more cooperatively to achieve the same goal.
Dr. Feige, and then I'm going to ask Dr. O'Meara and say, do Japanese scientists work well with their pharmaceutical industry? Dr.
We don't do anything without coalitions. We don't do anything by ourselves. And if you look at the best coalitions, the ones that are most effective, there are certain rules. One, they start out by defining what's the last mile. so that we don't just get together because we happen to be libertarians or Republicans or Democrats or Baptists, and then say, what are we going to do? You get together because of a last mile that you can actually visualize in your mind, and that's the important thing. Because then you can get ego suppression, which is very important for a coalition to work, where people are combined for an outcome rather than for their own turf. So I think that's very important. Will Durant said many years ago that he suspected the only way the world would develop a real coalition is if we feared an alien invasion. I think the surrogate for an alien invasion turns out to be things like AIDS and smallpox and global warming and all of these things, and that we should consciously use each one of them as a mechanism to improve the way we work together, because we can work together when we're in this together, when we're fearful of an outcome that we're all going to have. So I think that's the clue here, is to use health problems as surrogates for an alien invasion.
Dr. Omura, do Japanese scientists work well with industry?
I think recently that situation very much improved. Before, the government against the collaboration between the industry and the university, but recently the government is supporting the collaboration between the university and industry.
There is the recent example of this organization called GHIT, I think, which brings together 5 Japanese pharmaceutical associations with your institute in a recent grant, your university, and with other universities in the private sector to try to create these sorts of collaboratives that will sort of offer the bait that will bring together industry and academia together. So that's one example.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. We have 3 more, and we'll leave it at that. So let's take the first one.
Pinaki Panigrahi, Center for Global Health and Development, UNMC. I just have a quick comment, and I have been doing global health for 10, 12 years, but this is my first CUGH meeting I am attending. And so far, I was not really sure what was going on, and I heard yesterday, day before, it appeared to me like an advocacy body, and I didn't know whether because we were in Washington, some of the talks were more political than scientific, and we heard things against Chevron and Coca-Cola. So I was just scratching my head until now, and I have to thank Dr. Faggy for giving the lecture and kind of making it clear that we cannot really, even as scientists, we cannot work without the corporate sector and without the public. And I can tell you that I work in India to some extent, in Bangladesh and Pakistan, and also a little bit in Africa. The kind of solidarity and the kind of faith you described, I mean, that we experience all the time, whether you do it in a small scale or large scale. I started with a Fogarty program 10, 12 years ago. Then I had bigger NICHD funding and Gates funding, but still people who work in the community, they call it as a Fogarty project. I said, no, Fogarty was 12 years ago. Then we had NICHD, then we had Gates. They still think that it is a Fogarty project, and we don't really have to take consent if they know that it's a Fogarty funded project. So thank you for making it clear, so that the scientists who believe in getting out of mediocrity and getting recognized or getting help, I think that will happen, that will continue. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to take the question on the far left of the back, and then I'll come to the gentleman here in the front.
Okay, thanks. My name is Anders Kelto. I'm a health and development reporter, global health and development reporter with NPR. My first question is for Dr. Omura. I'm wondering why you chose to get a soil sample from a golf course. And did this discovery affect where you chose to take future soil samples in any way? And my question for Dr. Faggy is, does the type of loyalty that you described among employees at Merck back in the days of Jimmy Carter, still exists today, or do you think that that was a different time and place?
Very difficult to give a question, but my favorite sport is golf. That's all.
It's either that he likes golf or the only earth left in Tokyo is on a golf course.
The question about loyalty and was at a different time and a different place. It's not. It continues to exist, and let me give you just one example. For guinea worm, it required a filter to filter water to take out the water flea that contained the larval forms of guinea worm. And a group from DuPont, a subsidiary called Precision Fabrics, came up with a new cloth that wouldn't pull apart with multiple washings and so forth. And they gave the first 1,000,000 square yards free for guinea worm. And then they enjoyed doing this so much they kept giving it free. And President Carter went to Precision Fabrics to thank them, and he learned that they only made this particular cloth occasionally, like once a month. But on the days they made it, they had the lowest absenteeism ever. This loyalty continues in many ways.
Thank you. The last question.
Yeah, hi, Quentin Eichbaum, Vanderbilt University. On the one hand, we hear the story of Merck and its generosity regarding ivermectin, and then we have a concurrent story with Gilead and the Hep C kind of drug. So I'm wondering, what kind of lessons do we learn across the spectrum when we take into account as well the treatment action campaign, and does it actually have to take as much as that to achieve those kinds of results?
I'm going to ask Bill and King to comment.
I think the lesson is that corporations are just as confusing as individuals. And that we all have these two sides to us of things we wish we didn't do and things that we're happy we did.
I can't top that one, but I can say that historically when Merck was sort of on the grill for the introduction of protease inhibitors for HIV infection, and the prices were very high, they were getting much of the criticism from the global world, where the access to this drug was so limited because of its high costs. And ultimately, Merck was the first to back off from that and make it available at very low cost. But it was a lot of pressure from action groups that did lead to that, and from people in the world. I will tell you that I was talking to the president of Merck's research program when they made that decision, and he actually was crying when he told me about it, not out of fear that he was going to lose money, but out of happiness that he had been finally able to do it. So there are good people in industry as well.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. And I want to thank CUGH for having Gairdner here, for you being such an attentive audience. And I think this is a whole story that's been important to recognize, and it's been wonderful to hear all the special insights, how this got down from the golf course to the riverbeds where the affliction took place. And it's a whole set of progress that needs to be honored more, and we're grateful that we can do it on this occasion. Thank you very much.